Master Your Mindset Radio, episode 106.
Welcome to Master Your Mindset Radio, the show where we empower you to discover your true self before the world told you differently. Now for your host, Elizabeth Nader.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Master Your Mindset Radio. You guys know I like to bring you interesting interviews with people who have overcome odds, who have done inspirational things, who have gone through challenges and tragedies in life that a lot of us can relate to. And even if we can't relate to the details, we understand what it is to overcome. And today is no different. I want to welcome my friend, Cindy Gellermini, to the show. Cindy, thank you for joining me.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you here. And I am excited to bring your story to my audience. Some of my audience may already know you through various means, either in past interviews we've done or just the fact that you've kind of been in the media a lot lately, especially in New Jersey. But Cindy, we want to tell the story of you, of your son, Robbie, and all that you went through in that experience and really where it's brought you today. So I want to start at the beginning, just as Cindy the mom with your kids, and you have this beautiful boy that you give birth to, Robbie. Tell us what it was like when he came into this world, and then eventually what happened in a short amount of time where you knew you had a challenge in front of you.
Okay, well, I had twin girls first, and I was a very young mom. I was only 21 when I had them, but it was a very healthy twin pregnancy. That was considered to be a high risk pregnancy, and everything went great. My OBGYN said I was the healthiest twin pregnancy she ever had. I went practically full term, good sized babies, no issues. They were healthy, beautiful. And then when they were 4.5, I had another baby and I had my son, Robbie. And that delivery was not as easy. He went into fetal distress. They were turning me over, giving me oxygen, and it was right after Christmas. The hospital was really busy. I remember the doctor coming in after I was in labor for hours saying, "What is she still doing here? She should have had this baby hours ago." And they delivered him with forceps, and he needed his ears were folded over when he was born, and my pediatrician had said it's either the kidneys or the liver that forms at the same time. They were going to do an X-ray just to make sure he was okay. Everything came back okay. All right, so we thought he was fine. And then as time went on, though, he got a lot of ear infections. He got, at 6 months old, he got laryngitis. Like, what 6-month-old baby loses their voice and gets laryngitis?
Right.
But I just chalked this all up to he's just a different kid. My girls were brown hair, brown eyes. He was more fair, blonde hair, blue eyes, fairer skin. So he had eczema and, ear infections, allergies, puffy eyes. I just thought, he's just a different kid. And then it seemed that he couldn't hear, like he wouldn't respond when I called his name. But yet, if I would sing the Winnie the Pooh song, he would turn and look at me and he would come. So I knew he could hear me, but I just thought, wow, boys are just a lot more stubborn than girls. And he said a few words, but only when he was upset. Like if I dropped him off in the nursery when I went to go work out, usually a kid is going to cry for their mama. But Christmas time, went pretty well, his second birthday. And then by around March, I realized I don't think I've heard him say anything since Christmas. And I mentioned it to a friend who was a speech therapist, and her eyes popped out of her head. She says, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I just haven't heard him say anything." She said, "You need to get him evaluated immediately." And so we thought he was hearing impaired because of the ear infections, and we thought that he just couldn't hear high-pitched sounds. So I put him into early intervention with the Summit Speech School for hearing impaired kids, but he wasn't participating in the therapies like the other kids were. And like, for instance, they would play with trucks and they would say vroom vroom and want the kids to imitate your sound. And Robbie would he would just throw the truck across the room and he'd just scream and run for the door. So eventually, my therapist said to me, "Listen, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I don't think that he's hearing impaired. I think this is autism." and you should really get him evaluated. So we took him to a developmental pediatrician, and he just kind of went down a checklist of behaviors. There's no blood test or any kind of
Yeah.
test that you can take. It's just they just ask you about behaviors. And he said to me he has PDD-NOS, which is pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, which is uh, a name for mild autism. And he didn't tell me what autism was. All he did was he handed me a little pamphlet, and he said, take this home and read it. And that was it. There was no call me back, come back in a
Wow.
month. There was none of that. And I
Wow.
read the pamphlet. And mind you, Robbie was born in 1989. So this was around 1992. There was no internet. Okay. I couldn't go home and look up autism.
Right.
I just read this pamphlet and I was like, yeah, no, I don't think so. That's not him. From what I knew of autism was only what I saw on TV, and it meant they were in their own little world. They didn't pay, no eye contact. They don't like affection. And I was like, no, he doesn't check any of those boxes. He loves being hugged and kissed. He knows exactly where we are and what's going on in the house. Like, for instance, if he was in his playroom and somebody went in the bathroom and came out and didn't shut the door, he would come running out of his room and he would slam the door like, how dare you leave that door shut? How
Right.
dare you leave it open? So we knew he was very aware of his environment. It wasn't until I got to the very end where a mom told the story of her child, and she told about how he had this odd way of playing, how he'd stick a car in the register and he'd just listen to it drop down through the heat vent, and things like that, that I went,
Mm.
oh, wow, she's describing my son, because he would do weird things like that. Like, he'd take a ball and he'd run into the kitchen and he'd stand there and he'd drop it on the floor, and he would just watch it roll across the floor, and then he would squeeze his hands together really tight and get this excited look, like he'd like grind his teeth and
Mm.
squeeze real tight and get excited, and then he would do it over and over and over again, and it was and he loved water, he loved puddles. So if we were outside and he saw a puddle, he would go over to it and he would bend down. This was like a toddler, okay? And he would bend down and stick his head in the water, and then he'd stand up and look up at the sky and let the water drip down his face, and he would laugh. And he would do that same thing where he'd squeeze his hands, and he would get all excited, and he would do it over and over again. And we just thought, oh, okay, he's a funny kid.
Yeah.
you know
Right.
didn't really think anything of it, until I read this woman's story, and that's when it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh wow.
So that's when you really sort of you knew
Yeah.
this is probably what's going on. Now, there's a lot more to tell, obviously. This is
Mhm.
just the beginning, but I
Yeah,
want to take you back a little bit
yeah,
though,
and I just
because
wanted to make a point
yeah,
that
go
it
ahead.
was when I heard the mom's story, that's when it got
Yes.
through to me. It was, I
Right.
said, that doctor doesn't know what he's talking about.
Right, which
So
is
yeah.
really interesting, and I think that
Mhm.
that speaks to sort of the importance of what you're doing now, as well as we've seen the movement of mothers with autistic children and how they have built a community and how that's so important.
Mhm.
But you're a mom who already had healthy girls. You've
Mhm.
been through this. You were expecting to have a healthy boy. You were ready for that. You didn't
Mhm.
have a different paradigm. So how when you realized, oh my gosh, okay, there's something that's not quite right here. When you finally stepped into that, when you heard her story,
Mhm.
what is your mind saying to you? What is your heart feeling? What did that feel like? Because now all of a sudden you're in a new realm that you've never been in before. And
Right.
you have to know on some level, life is never going to be the same.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. It's a new realm. So the way it felt was that healthy child that I thought I had, that we were dressing him in Yankees outfits, and my husband thinks he's going to be the next Derek Jeter someday, and you
Mhm.
think about how, oh, he's going to play sports and he's going to get married and he's going to do all these things. All of a sudden you realize, that's not the child that I have. And that
Wow.
child is gone, and now I have a disabled child. And so I actually had to go through mourning. I had to mourn that child that was in my head, and now accept and fall in love with this new child.
Yeah.
So it took me about a week. And you go through all the phases of mourning, the denial, the anger, the sadness, all of that. And then after a week, I said, okay, that's it. That's enough. Okay, it is what it is, and let's do what needs to be done. So that's.
Cindy, are you that way with other challenges? It's interesting I hear you
Mhm,
say that because I hear some people will say to me when they face something really difficult, some people linger with it for years and they don't
mhm,
come to that place.
mhm,
Others have this personality or this God-given ability to sort of say, all right, I'm going to take my time. And in this case, it was a week. Okay, that's it. I'm done.
mhm.
Let's plow forward. Is that how you're built?
Uh, I think so. Yeah, I think it's part of my personality, but also I had a very difficult childhood.
Mm,
So it wasn't easy. And like, I grew up with an abusive father, but also we moved every other year. I started a new school every year. I still to this day have nightmares that it's the first day of school in a new
wow.
school and I don't know anybody. So, I had no choice but to keep, moving forward. And, I dealt with trauma and things as a kid. So I can't focus on negative things for very long or you go nuts. So yeah,
Yeah.
I just have to keep, no, I just have to keep looking forward like the racehorse with the blinders on, just keep looking forward, keep running the race, keep going, okay, it's difficult, but let's jump the hurdles and keep going.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's kind of in some ways the things you went through, the difficulties as a child prepared you in that regard to sort of step up and say, all right, this is tough. I don't
Yeah.
want this. It's not the expectations.
Hmm.
As mothers, we have so much in terms of expectation, don't we? I mean, even the second time, the third time, the fourth time, you just do because
Yeah.
you imagine this child growing up, you imagine them as an adult, you have a lot of expectations. So in your
Hmm.
case, you took the time that you thought you needed. Now, let's stop there for a second again because now of course and we'll talk about what God is doing with your life because I'm
Hmm.
watching you just walk into something that you probably didn't realize you would in terms of your influence and ability to reach out
Hmm.
to others. When you talk to a mother, to a parent who can't seem to get past the darkness of that diagnosis, who can't seem to come to terms with it,
Hmm.
what do you say to them?
Well, this is the key, and this is the message that I keep trying to tell people is right around that time when Robbie was diagnosed, I was going to church at the time, a church that taught Word of Faith, which I have to explain that to people that don't know. It's a very positive message, and basically, it means you learn Bible verses and apply them to your life. So, for instance, if you are sick, then you look up scriptures on healing and you speak, healing
Mhm.
scriptures. Okay, but the culture is very big on God is good all the time, all the
Right.
time. God is good. Well, you know what? Good stuff doesn't always happen, and it's sort of, if you're not really paying attention, you could get this false sense of that, life is always going to be a bowl of cherries, and God is only going to make good things happen in my life. And then as soon as something bad happens, people lose faith and they
Right.
leave church and they leave God and they're like, well, you let me down. That's not how it works. So I was in my kitchen one day and I was praying. I asked God, what do I do? I don't know how to raise. I don't know how to raise a kid with special needs, but back up because when I was raising my daughters, I prayed because I had such terrible parents that I
Mm.
always was praying. I was like, God, please show me how to be a good parent. And basically, I did everything the exact opposite of what my parents did. And my kids turned out great.
Yeah.
Thank God. So this was a whole different scenario now. I'm like, God, how do I do this? I don't know how. And I heard God say to me, it was one of the only times where I felt like I really just heard this voice that said, just love him the way he is.
Mm.
I was like, oh, that's it? Just love, oh, like, okay, I can do that. And I had no idea how profound that would end up being. So later, a friend of mine who went to my church, she confronted me and she's like, you should be praying over him every day. You should be speaking the word over him every day for him to get healed. And I put my hand up in front of her and I said, stop. I said, God told me, love him the way he is. And
Mhm.
that's what I'm going to do. And if down the line God says to me, okay, now it's time to pray for him to be healed, then that's what I'll do. But I think it's more important to talk to God about something first and see what he has to say about it before I listen to what everybody else has to say. So that was it. That was my message. And then as I started, I put Robbie in a school for autistic kids and meeting other parents, going to some of their meetings and stuff. The culture back then was that autism was this horrible curse that was put on your child. It was this like a horrible disease, like a death sentence, and you had to do everything you could to cure them and get the autism to go away, to
Mm.
just, and so it was kind of like the church was echoing this same message. It's like you should do everything you can to make him not be autistic anymore. And they would bring in all kinds of people that did like all kinds of stuff, auditory training, special glasses, go into this therapy, go into a salt room, go swim with dolphins, go do that, go do that. I remember put them on these vitamin therapies, like all different kinds of things. So whatever parents could do to get their kids to snap out of the autism, they would. Plus also I noticed the other parents were either depressed or angry, and I just felt a lot of anger in the room, like they were looking for someone to blame. They were trying to blame the doctors, blame this, blame that for their kids' autism. And it was like they just couldn't accept their kid the way they were. And that bothered me.
Mm.
I was like, why can't you just accept your child the way they are? Why are you trying to change them? How come parents of kids with Down syndrome aren't trying to take the Down syndrome away? Why is autism different? You know? These were
Wow.
just questions I was asking myself. Um, and so, once in a while I would feel guilty. I'm like, oh, maybe I should put him on a vitamin therapy, and it made him worse. Oh, maybe I should put him on this medication. It made him crawling out of his skin. And I was like, no, you know what? I'm just going to love my son the way he is, and that's what I did. So he's like, I just babysat my little grandson who's 1 year old today, and I was like, every little thing he does is adorable, even though he was testing me, and he was trying to go throw something in the toilet, and he was trying to get into the cabinets and doing all these things that he's not supposed to do. I'm See, you just chuckled, right? I'm laughing at him. I'm like, oh well, aren't you cute? I was like, oh, that's
Yeah.
so adorable. And that's how I was with Robbie, his whole life. I'm like, oh, you're so cute, you know
Wow, that's I mean that is profound what God told you, because of course later that comes out even, and we're going to talk about, the books you wrote and
Mhm.
everything, but this it sounds to me like it's with any challenge, it's like an acceptance of it without it's not as though you didn't fight for him. It's not as though you didn't spend a life with him trying to make it the best you could, but you did it in a context of accepting him, accepting the situation, not wishing it away, although I'm sure you had your moments, as anyone would, not trying to deny, if you will, that this is the reality of it, and trying to find a space to live in. Now, you had to do that acceptance and living with that with having other children, a husband. How does the family adjust to this? Because it seems to me that when you have someone like Robbie who needs more than
Mhm.
another child would, isn't everyone adjusting? And as a mom, what
Mhm.
did you do with there had to be some sense of guilt or some sense of burden to make sure the girls were okay, your husband was okay. How do you adjust to all of that?
Well, Robbie, he was our baby, and the girls were, almost 5 years older than him. So they always babied him and played with him and took care of him. So they were like other little mothers to him. So they just had these natural maternal instincts. And so we all, I guess I was also somehow aware of not making everything always all about Robbie. I see other moms that do that. They become these warrior moms that all their focus is on their autistic child, and that can
Mm.
leads to divorce. It leads to resentment with the other kids. I mean, on my podcast, I've been interviewing a bunch of other moms, and I'm seeing the cycles, and I don't know. I never did that. And the girls always just loved Robbie like he was their baby brother, like in any family. The change came when Robbie was 5, and then I had my fourth son, David. And then David was the baby too. And so we had the two baby boys. Um, and the girls loved them. And we just, tried to spread time evenly. The difference was that Robbie, as he started getting older, he wouldn't go anywhere. He didn't like to go anywhere, do anything. He would throw a tantrum if we went out in public anywhere. So just wanted to stay home and watch Disney videos all the time. So
Mm.
my husband and I would split things up. So he would take the girls to softball and I'd stay home. I would take the girls to ballet and my husband would stay home. Um, and then with David, it was different now because now Robbie was older than him. It wasn't the same dynamic as with my girls. And that's when I started to see the difference. Like David would be like, I don't know, 2, 3 years old, laying on the couch trying to watch cartoons. And Robbie would come running out of his room and he would grab David and yank him down onto the floor. And I knew he wanted to wrestle with him. And I would just tell David, oh, just hop on his back and wrestle with him. And it was because he liked the pressure. The pressure
Right.
made him feel good. It was, good sensory.
Right.
And he loved to jump on the trampoline. So he loved when the girls would go jump on the trampoline with him. But as David got older, when he went to kindergarten, he invited a friend to come over, and Robbie was in his room, and when he gets excited on certain parts of his movies and he jumps up and down. I got him a bed that he could jump on, and he it was like a big plastic car bed, and he would bang on it and he would make noise and be like, hoo, hoo, hoo,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
for this little kindergarten kid to see this 10-year-old in the other room making all these weird noises and banging and stuff, he was scared and he cried and he called his mother to come pick him up and take him home. And David was so embarrassed that he never had a friend come over again until he got much older. And then later on in life, when Robbie started having seizures, it developed into, you know, 911 calls, the police and the rescue squad coming over. It was very traumatic. And David started having, stomach aches, and
Yeah.
he had, very nervous. And we had to set up a whole protocol that if Robbie had a seizure, we would send him immediately next door to the neighbor's house so that he wouldn't be here to see all the commotion. I mean, the first time he had a seizure, they did CPR on him. He died, and they revived him and brought him back.
Oh,
So it's a lot of trauma that we dealt with. But one thing that I learned from Robbie's school that I'm very thankful for is they used positive reinforcement to reinforce good behaviors and things, and try to uh, lessen bad behaviors, which would be biting yourself,
right.
pinching, kicking, banging your head through the wall, banging your head on the floor. I mean, like things that are very, dangerous that these kids do, and just reinforcing good stuff. So, and there's a lot of good job, Robbie, a lot of high fives, and we just, that just became our language all the time, and with all of our kids.
Mm.
It's always, hey, good job, oh, I'm so proud of you, good job, oh, I love you so much. There just was so much of that with
Yeah.
all of our kids. So, which I'm so thankful for. I thank God for that, because when you grow up in an abusive home, and just from when all of us were growing up, our parents used to spank, hit, yell, call you names, all that kind of stuff. And this
Yeah.
is the exact opposite. It's just constant positive reinforcement. And I think that was, I'm thankful for that.
As the girls and your younger son look back on all of that, I'm sure you guys have had conversations about that. Do they see that as well, or how do they see Robbie's presence in their life as children shaping everything? Do they think about that?
Well, the girls, Robbie was their inspiration for everything. I mean, my daughter Patty ended up becoming a special ed teacher. She was very talented in art, and they wanted her to go, to art school, and she said, "No, I'm going to teach special ed." Like, she was very firm about that. And David, like I said, it was more traumatic, and he had a different relationship with him. And I interviewed him one time for my YouTube channel, and I said, "How did you feel?" And he said he was afraid of him.
Mm.
And I said, "When did you stop being afraid of him?" He said, "When I became bigger than him,"
Oh, wow.
which was when he got. David is now 6'4", 275 pounds. He's huge.
Wow. Wow.
So the big breakthrough for David was, I don't know if you're familiar with Young Life, but
Yes.
right. So the leader of Young Life, they have camp, which is amazing camp. I went when I was a kid in high school, best week of my life.
Yeah.
And then the week after, they do a camp for special needs kids called Capernaum. And he asked David to be a counselor, to be a buddy. Okay. So he went up there. My friend Teresa's son, Robert, went. He has special needs, and David was his buddy the whole time. And David suddenly realized that he grew up with this and this was easy for him and he had so much fun. It gave him purpose and he felt good about himself and he felt good about skills that he didn't know that he had.
Yeah.
Like he had to give Robert a shower, he had to dress him, make sure he ate and play with him and make sure he had a good time. And I knew when he came home from Young Life camp, he would say that was the best week of my life. He came back from Capernaum camp and he said, Mom, that was the best week of my life.
Wow. Wow, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
that was huge. And so now, um, David, he went to college for, sports marketing and stuff. He always wanted to do sports and he got a job in the city doing sales and stuff and he hated it and he lost his job with COVID. And my daughter said, David, you should really just go work at Robbie's old school and see if you like it
Yeah.
because I think you'd be perfect at that. And his baseball coach told him the same thing. Dude, you should be teaching special ed. You're built for this. You grew
Yeah.
up with it. It's easy for you. And so guess what? He went to work in September last year at Robbie's old school and he loves it.
Oh,
He found his purpose. So
I
but he's
love it.
looking at it from a different perspective now as an adult.
Right, exactly. It came sort of full circle.
Yeah.
So as Robbie started to, he was into his teens now,
Mhm.
and getting older. At some point, you saw that you could no longer keep him in the home environment, and so eventually he needed to go into his own
Yeah, well,
group home.
so what happened is the seizures were horrific. They were grand mal seizures. Like I said, if they lasted a minute, he had to go to the hospital.
Mm.
And the neurologist said, keep a calendar. What's going on with his, digestive and his behaviors and stuff. And he would vomit all night long, like every half hour vomit till nothing was left but green stomach bile coming out. That's when he would finally stop.
Mm.
And he always would be very grouchy, violent ahead of time. Then the vomiting would come, then the seizure would come. And
Mm.
he said, keep a calendar. And it happened on Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, February vacation. April was another seizure, Memorial Day weekend. The day after school ended in June. So the third time in the hospital, I looked at the calendar and said, OMG, this is every time he's off of school.
Wow.
And he was completely nonverbal. He didn't speak at all. He wore a diaper into adulthood. He was still watching Disney videos at 27 years old, so people understand, where he was. He was not a Rain Man. Okay, he was he was
Right.
severe, like as severe as you can get with when it comes to autism. And he didn't really understand what you were saying, as far as I could tell. He didn't really seem to understand most speech. But if he saw us sitting at the dining room table, he knew it was a holiday because that's the only time we sat there. And that's when he would start getting agitated. He'd start running back and forth. He'd run into the living room, take all my pillows and off the couch and throw them on the floor and run back to his room. And we were like, oh boy, he's aggravated. So I realized he was putting two and two together. Oh no, because I couldn't figure out what is his problem with holidays? Why doesn't he like it? And then it dawned on me, he knows he's not going to go to school for the next couple days now.
Yeah.
His
Yeah.
whole routine is thrown off. So
Right.
the third time in the hospital, I realized I'm like, it's every weekend he was getting sick. Every weekend he had diarrhea, and every holiday would get beyond it would be the vomiting and the seizures. And I learned that seizures come on by stress. So I'm like, he's getting stressed out to the point where he's having a seizure. He's so stressed that he's not going
Wow.
to have school and he's going to be home. So this was 2008 when the stock market dropped. But I said maybe I can get him into a residential school. I called the board of ed. I called anybody I could think of, and I just couldn't make it happen. I couldn't do it. So finally, I broke down and I called the state. They came over. They evaluated him. They could not believe how severe he was. Um, they couldn't believe I was doing this all by myself. And
Wow.
then they do everything they can to keep them in the home. I thought Robbie would live with me for the rest of my life. I just want to
Sure.
make that clear with everybody. I had no intentions of ever putting him in a group home. It wasn't until I was sitting there looking at him sick in the hospital that I looked at him and I said, I'm being selfish keeping him home because he doesn't want to be here. He's 19 years old. And even though mentally he might be one or two, physically he's a 19-year-old. He
Mm.
would normally at this age be going off to college. kids that age want to be with their friends. They don't want to hang out with their parents
Right.
all day. They want to
Right.
be with their friends. They want to be with their peers. And that's what's going on here. He wants to be in his environment with his peeps, you know. He doesn't want to be here. So that's when I realized I need to do this for him because I think this is what he wants. I had to read his mind. I had to just try to figure it out. So anyway, long story short, the state said we think that a group home would be best for him. Then he can get 24-hour care, and he was number 4,555 on the priority list. That's how many people
Oh
were
my
were ahead of him.
gosh.
Yeah. Then I found out that's not the list. There's an emergency list that you have to put them on. They have to be in danger of imminent peril. And I had to prove to them that the seizures were life threatening. They were brought on by stress every time he was home. And if he didn't get out of the home and get in a more structured environment, that the seizures, he could die from a seizure someday.
Right.
So, so we put him into a place that took kids under 21, and within 48 hours he had a seizure. We brought him home, and I said, "You people have no idea what you're doing. I will never bring him back again." Um, and they begged me to try over again. So we changed the whole thing, and they came to visit him every day for 6 weeks. And then it got to the point where he was going to the door after school looking for them to see, when are they coming today? Are they coming to get me? And then we
Mm.
tried a sample overnight, and then that went well, and then eventually he went in. But the bottom line is they had no idea how to handle somebody with autism. They had not dealt with it before. Group homes are elderly people being taken care of by retirees. It's people that have not autism. They have different special needs, like they're in a wheelchair, they move in slow motion, they're very easy to take care of. And then here comes my 20-year-old son, full of energy, running back and forth and frustrated because they don't understand him. And so he picks up a chair, throws it across the room. It scares the old lady taking care of him, so she calls the police. They come over, they take him out of the house in handcuffs.
Oh my.
And then I show up and I see the cop taking him out in handcuffs, and I had to keep myself calm because I'm like, you just took my baby out of the
Oh,
he is, and Robbie's laughing because he thinks it's a game. He thinks it's funny. He has no idea what's going on.
yeah.
And I said to the police officer, I said, "Do you have any training in people with autism?" He said, "No, we don't." I said, "Well, that's obvious." And
Right.
I shut my mouth. Like I was fuming, but I had to keep my mouth shut. That's when I started turning on my phone and recording what was going on, because I'm like, this is ridiculous. It's like the
Mm.
state is trying to tell me that a group home is best for him. They have no idea what they're doing. They've never dealt with anybody with autism before. This is a disaster.
Mm.
The police need training. There were no day programs after he turned 21. If it wasn't for 6 moms from Basking Ridge that got together and raised money and started their own day program, he wouldn't even have had a day program to go to.
Wow.
So just the whole thing was just horrendous. So I followed him around for 4 years, just trying to make that point, to make it public. Look, that something needs to be done, because when Robbie was diagnosed with autism, it was 1 in 10,000 kids being diagnosed with autism. Now it's up to 1 in 50, and in New Jersey, it's 1 in 32 boys.
Oh my
Okay.
goodness.
How do we go from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 32 within that, 25-year cycle or
Wow.
whatever? Okay. And I kept trying to say, there is a tsunami that is going to hit the system, and New Jersey better step up
Yeah.
and start putting money into this and do something, because there's nothing out there for when these kids turn 21. They need
Yeah.
day programs, they need group homes, they need, and this is my driving thing behind me, is to do something about the group home situation. And it should not be a minimum wage job, people with no
Right.
training taking care of these people, giving them their meds.
Oh,
I mean, come on,
yeah.
so something needs to be done. It's
Well,
it's a
it's
pandemic, is what it is.
it is, and like you said, it's only getting worse until something changes. I don't know, but we're going to have a lot of kids aging out of all of these things that were created for them, and I don't think people really understand when they all become adults. I've been educated on this since understanding what you've been through and looking at this differently, and it is something society is going to need to take very seriously. So I want to, and this is part of, obviously you're following your calling now, but let's continue the story about Robbie
Mhm.
because eventually Robbie did pass, and I want you to tell that part of the story, how that happened,
Mhm.
and what that felt like for you to go through that.
So when we finally started getting the group home thing straightened out. They finally brought in, people that Robbie liked. They started taking in more autistic people. They started getting better at it. He had a day program that he liked. Everything was going great. If I ever got a phone call at 7 o'clock in the morning, I knew what it meant. I knew Robbie must have had a seizure. Sometimes he goes to the hospital, sometimes not. Depends on how long it lasted. So this one morning on November 7th, the phone rings at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it's the aide. And he says, Robbie had a seizure. I said, yeah, I figured that. And he says, it's been 20 minutes. And he hangs up the phone. And I was like,
What?
what? 20 minutes? I'm like, a 1 minute seizure puts him in the hospital. How could it be 20 minutes? Um, I'm stunned. So I hurry up and get dressed. I grab my bag of stuff that I normally bring for him so he can watch his movies when we get there. He always needs a change of clothes. I called my pastor. I said, start the prayer chain right now. I don't know what's going on. I called my husband. I told him, I said, just meet me at the hospital. So I drive to the hospital and I get there, and the ambulance should have been there waiting for me at the ER because Robbie lives like a mile from the hospital and I'm like, 7 miles away,
Yeah.
and the ambulance is not there. And I'm like, well, I'm just so confused. Like, what is happening? I just don't get it. And then my husband shows up with his friend from work, drove him, and my husband called the house and he says, is there a police officer there? Because I knew that they had called 911. So,
Yeah.
and they said yes. And my husband says, put him on the phone. And my husband walks away, and I'm talking to his friend, trying to tell him what's going on. And my husband, he stops talking. He hangs up the phone. He just looks at me and he says, Robbie's in heaven.
Oh,
And I just collapsed and screamed, no, you're lying. No, he's coming here. You're lying. Just,
oh,
I was just like, I was like, no, just fell, and
oh,
it was just horrific. So then now my husband had been a fireman for years. Okay. So he knew what the scene looked like at Robbie's house. And he says, I'm not bringing you there. I don't want you going there. I don't want you to see all the equipment and the wires and all that kind of. He says, I'm not doing that. He says, I'm taking you home.
hmm,
So we go home, and then, I have to call my daughter who, from work, who lives here. And we told her, just come home. Like, we wouldn't tell her what until she got there. We called my
yeah.
mother-in-law. We're like, just come here. We have to tell you, and so they come over and we had to tell them at home. Then my daughter, who was the special ed teacher, she probably had the closest bond with Robbie of all. She had moved to North Carolina. I'm like, God, how am I going to tell her?
Oh,
So I called her husband at work and I had to tell him, and he started crying and hung up on me.
oh,
So he went home and he had to tell her, and she, same thing. She just fell on the floor. She just collapsed. And David was at college.
hmm,
God, I don't even remember how we told him. He was playing football. It was his senior year playing football, and he was about to have his last game of his senior year where you walk your son out on the field
yeah,
and that whole thing. So, and then we passed my old church on the way, and I told my husband, I said, just pull over. And I ran in to go see Colleen because did she's the person that, I can't remember what you call it, but she'll visit sick people at home, and she
right.
does funerals and things like that. Her gift is compassion. She's the most compassionate, loving woman I've ever met. And I just ran to her office and I just collapsed in her arms and cried.
Wow.
So she said, we're going to do the funeral here and all that kind of stuff. And meanwhile, I'm and then I said, I have to see Robbie one more time. I can't, but I was
Yeah,
I didn't know what to do. Like, I didn't, I had to see him one more time, but yet I didn't want to see him like that.
yeah.
So my daughter and my mother-in-law and my husband and I, we all drove to his house, and I wouldn't go in. And Denise went in with my husband, and she came back out. And Denise was my rock that day.
Hmm,
And she said, Mom, just go in. They put him on his bed. They covered him with a blanket. He looks like he's asleep. Just go in there and just go say goodbye. So I walked in and I noticed in the kitchen that all the furniture had been pushed aside. And there was, so I knew they must have brought him in there on the floor and must have done CPR on him on the floor.
yeah.
And then I turn into his room. Now, mind you, I had put Disney stickers on the wall. He got Disney princesses up there, and the Lion
Mm,
King,
mm.
And I just saw his feet sticking out from under the blanket, and I collapsed again. I just fell on the floor and just hysterical. Because his feet were always special. Like, he had neuropathy in his feet. He had very high arches, and so I used to always massage his feet and kiss his feet all the
Mm,
time. So like and they were still like my little boy feet, when I saw them,
yeah.
and I just wanted to kiss his feet, and to see his feet just all blue and cold.
Oh,
It was
Cindy.
just. So then
Oh,
I got myself to get up, and I used to I used to always kiss him on the cheek like 7 times, and as soon as I would be done kissing him, he would always wipe it off.
yeah.
And I would always laugh and say, "Don't wipe it off."
Yeah.
So so I did that, and I looked at him, and he wasn't there. I said,
Yeah.
That's a shell. He's not here anymore." But
Yeah.
I kissed him on the cheek, and I said, "No, don't wipe it off."
Oh,
And then I just sat there in the chair, and the next thing you know, the funeral home is showing up, and they're ready to take him out, and they were like, "Okay, we have an appointment for you at 1 o'clock to come," and it becomes all business,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, you're sitting in a funeral home, and they said, "Okay, so do you want to have him cremated?" And I was like, I had this split second flash of him laying there and going into like a fiery furnace. I got up and I ran out of the room, and I'm
Oh,
like, I can't even think about this right now. So, and then I pulled myself together, and I came, and I had to come back in the room. But I'm like, I'm like, can I just process what
yeah.
just happened to my son before you ask me these questions?
Yeah.
It just comes out of nowhere, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, where's he going to be buried? Where are you having the surf? Like, I'm like, I can't even deal with this. So then I said, I had seen years ago that they make jewelry out of ashes. So I
Yeah.
said to them, just save some of the ashes for me because I'd like to have a necklace made. And she had the brochure in her office, and she slid it across the desk and handed it to me. She says, "Here, pick one out." So I picked one out that was glass, and it had like blue in the glass where it looked like water. And I said, "Well,
Mm,
Robbie always loved the water." I said, "If he would live in the water if he could." So that's
yeah.
the one I picked. It looked like water. My daughter bought it for me as a
Mm,
gift. Um, and then, I decided I think this was like on a Thursday, and I decided to wait till the weekend was over, like Monday or Tuesday, to do his memorial service because I wanted David to finish his last football game. So this is Thursday. So the next day, we get in the car and we drive up to Newport, Rhode Island to go up so that David could have his last Saturday game. I didn't want to take
sure.
that away from him. And
Yeah.
we had to walk David down the field, and his football coach got autism stickers for all the guys to put on their helmets for that game to
Oh,
honor Robbie that day.
wow.
And all the parents knew. I mean, it just the whole thing is just like you're numb.
Yeah.
When you're up there, and everybody asks you, what happened, and you go over the story over and over and over.
Right. Right. Wow.
So, but here's another thing that I want to tell you. So, I think, well, maybe we went up on Saturday. I don't know. I don't remember the timeline. Well, yeah, it happened Thursday. Anyway, when the family and friends come over the house, right?
Right. Right.
So the family and friends come over to the house, and my husband is telling them this whole story about the first time Robbie had a seizure, and my husband did CPR on him, and he called him back. He was yelling, "No, Robbie, come back, come back!
Mm,
You can't do this to me! Come back!" And the ambulance took him out. He was gone. And they took him out to the ambulance. He was out for like 15 minutes, and then all of a sudden, the guy from the squad comes back and knocks on the door and says, "He's up."
wow.
Like, you're kidding. So he came back to life. Now, I didn't know. I thought Robbie just had gone unconscious and woke up. I didn't know the whole story until this day when my husband was telling people. And I was like, I'm like, "Wait, what?" And he says, "Listen to me. You see how he looked today? See how he was so blue, he was turning black?" He said, "That's what he looked like 10 years ago.
Oh,
He was gone. I was calling you to tell you that Robbie was gone that day." I was like, "I didn't know this. I must have not wanted to hear it." And I was
yeah.
total denial 10 years earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, so then somebody leaves, and they come back in the house, and they're holding this little toy penguin that they found on my front yard. And they said, "Were your nieces here today?" And I said, "No, why?" And they said, "Well, we found this little penguin out there. Maybe it's theirs." I'm like, "I don't know. I've never seen it before." And I stick it on my table, and I think nothing of it. Then a couple days later, my husband goes, this is, I guess, the next week, right? My husband goes back to work, and there's this glass paperweight penguin sitting on his desk. And he's like, where did this come from?
Oh my
And
gosh.
nobody knew. Nobody ever noticed it before. Nobody, he's like, that's really weird. He brought it home and he put it down. And we keep finding penguins.
Oh,
And then the day of his memorial service, my daughter has a dream that Robbie showed up at my front door wearing a tuxedo. She's like, Mom, he looked so good. He looked like Leo DiCaprio, in the dream. And he was wearing a tux, and he knocked on the door and he's like, let's go. We're running late. Like, let's get the show on the road. It was like, okay, okay,
oh,
So it was like he was ready for his celebration service, and he's like, come on,
yeah.
people, I'm ready. Let's go, right? So I look up a picture of Leo DiCaprio in a tuxedo, and the first thing that comes up is a cartoon of a penguin,
Oh,
because a tuxedo is called a penguin suit.
yep.
Okay, this is what's going on here
This,
with the penguin, right?
right, right.
So a week later, whenever it was, we go to clean out his room at his group home. And, he would always obsess over some Disney movie at the time. And I said, I'm curious, what's the last movie he ever watched? I hit the eject button on his DVD player, and out comes Happy Feet, about
Oh
the
my
daredevil
gosh.
penguins. I said, okay, all right.
Oh my
This
gosh.
is like beyond. This is Robbie obviously telling me something about
Yes.
penguins. I don't know what the deal is with the penguins, but obviously he liked penguins and he's trying to tell me something.
Yes, obviously. Wow. Wow. And of course, people that don't know the story are listening saying, okay, penguins.
Mhm.
Okay, so I mean, this is crazy, but and
Yes,
we also have to tell the necklace story in a
yes,
second, but
exactly. Yes.
but bring us right to what you have recently published because that's going to just blow people away.
Okay. So I my business is I'm a color consultant. I'm an expert at choosing paint colors for people. Okay. I've been doing it for over 15 years.
Right.
And I was working on a book on how to choose paint colors. So I go to a book seminar, okay, workshop, about book writing, and I sit down next to a friend of mine she's very prophetic, and she knew the whole story about the penguins and everything, right? And I sit down next to her, and she looks at me, and she goes, "You're going to write a children's book about a penguin,
Oh,
about your son Robbie." And I was like, "I am?" I was like, "Okay." I'm like, "That's a cute idea. Put it on the back burner though, because I have to finish the other book first." Okay.
yeah.
So then, like, 9 months later, I'm talking to a PR woman on the phone, again, because I want to work on getting PR for this other book, right? So she Googled me first, and she's saying, "What's this Robbie and me autism thing? What is that all about?" I was like, "Well, that's my YouTube channel, whatever." And I told her the whole story. I told her about the necklace. We'll get back to that, right?
Right.
And she says, "Well, what are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I built up all this momentum. I had thousands of followers all over the world, and I can't film Robbie anymore. I don't really know what to do." She says, "Well, why don't you write a book?" I said, "Well, I did have the idea to write a little children's book about a penguin with autism." She's like, "Oh my God." She's like, "That's huge. That's huge. You have to do that. That's amazing." I'm like, "Okay."
That is such the perfect voice of a book agent. But yes,
Yes, and
okay.
she's a New Yorker on top of it. She's like, "Oh my God."
I
It
love
was
it.
hilarious. It was hilarious, right? I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
"Oh, okay, who knew?" So I post on Facebook, that I'm thinking about doing this, and it blew up. Like 400 people commented, "Oh, that's amazing. You have to do that." I was like, "It's only a children's book. Like, what is the big deal? I don't understand." So I sat down and I wrote the first story, and a typical children's book is 25 pages long. Okay, so
Right.
so I hit 25 pages easily, and the whole thing rhymed, because I also had this background of songwriting, so I can think and rhyme and write in songs. So it was very that was very easy. But the first story was the little penguin. He's named Robbie. It was not everything happened to Robbie, but it's like he didn't go to daycare. But the first story was the penguin goes to daycare, and the teacher notices that he doesn't sit for circle time. He really likes to rock. He doesn't play with blocks. He doesn't talk. All these things. And she tells the mom, "I think, you better get him evaluated." So he goes to the doctor. The doctor says he has autism, hands the mama the pamphlet, just like the doctor did with me, and said, "This is autism." And that's it. And then,
Mm,
and throughout the story, the mama says, "I love you just the way you are."
yeah.
Every story begins with, "Robbie is a penguin who likes riding in the car. His mama always says, 'I love you just the way you are.'"
Mm,
And we know where that came from. So I told you the story. I basically, what God told me when he was 2 years old, that's what I said in this story. And then I said, well, wait a minute, that's only the beginning. He was just diagnosed. There's so much more. There's so many other stories. So many things happened when he was little. So I just kept writing, and I wrote 12 stories. I had it done in just a couple days. And they all rhymed, and I felt like it was just dropped straight down out of heaven. Like I didn't even have to think about what I was going to write. It just came. It just like
Uh,
poured right out of me. And it was like unbelievable. Like I don't want to give away the end, but
yeah.
every chapter the mom says, I love you just the way you are. And
Mm,
I even throw in a subtle way, I'm throw in advice to parents, and it's teaching kids about autism in a cute, funny way. Like in the second chapter, I was the brownie leader when my girls were little, and Robbie took off and ran out, and I I ran out of the building to go try to find him, and they went to Salt Brook School because there's a Salt Brook behind the school.
mm,
How Robbie knew there was a brook in the woods, I have no idea, but that's where I found him, splashing in the water in the woods
of
in the
course.
brook. Okay,
Of course.
so and then at the end of every chapter, I write a mom's minute where I talk to the adults, and then I explain to the adults what just happened. And so I'll say, like, it's when they run away, it's called eloping. It's very common. They'll do it a lot, and a lot of them are fascinated with the water. Every time Robbie ran away, he was looking for a neighbor's pool or a brook or something. He was looking for the water.
Yeah.
So it's very important for them to learn how to swim at an early age.
Yeah.
So I give the advice to parents. And then I did all the illustrations, 340 of them. It took me, like 6 months, but I got them all done. And as I was working on it, I realized the potential. I said, hold on a minute. Now, parents that their kids are newly diagnosed, they might be in the same situation as me where they're in denial. They're not accepting what the doctor said. They're thinking, this doctor doesn't know what they're talking about. But if they read these stories and then they start seeing their child in the stories,
Yeah.
then they're going to say, oh, wait a minute.
Hmm.
Robbie the penguin sounds a lot like my kid, but reading it in a children's story with cute illustrations and funny stories, it's an easier pill to swallow.
Right.
And then I realized, okay, let's say you have a kid that's diagnosed, their siblings. Read the stories to the siblings. Now the siblings understand what autism. Now you might have grandparents that don't believe that autism is a real thing, or whatever.
Yeah.
I've heard those stories. Have the grandparents read the stories. Now the grandparents understand. Then I had a teacher friend said, oh, I can't wait to read these books to my class. Light bulb. Oh, wait a minute. Teachers
Mm,
could read these books to their class, and then the kids in school will learn what autism is. And then if they have a classmate that has autism, if they have a meltdown or they're stimming or something, then the kids will understand. So instead of saying, oh, he's so weird, they'll say, oh, I get it. He's just like Robbie the Penguin. So when they fall in love with Robbie the Penguin, then they'll have, empathy, compassion, whatever, understanding for their classmates. And I'm getting tired of hearing stories about bullying. So many parents
right.
are worried about their kids going back to school and that they're going to get bullied. I'm like, tell the teacher to read these books to the class. I had a friend years ago that did that. She was moving here from the Midwest. Her son had cerebral palsy. She did a film about her child, and they showed it to the whole school before they moved there. They explained what cerebral palsy was. They said they saw Tim. They knew who he was. So by the time Tim arrived, he was a rock star. All the
Wow.
kids couldn't wait to meet Tim, and I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah.
So
Amazing.
so that's what I see. That's how I see the books being used. Doctors could have it in their office and give it to the patients, just like the doctor did with me.
So, one of the amazing things that I just want to, again, focus on with these books is how God just absolutely brought together your talents, your abilities, your experiences. And when you think about these books, I mean, the illustrations alone, beautifully well done, but that comes from your ability as an artist, and you've been one for, forever, and your ability to paint incredible settings that I've seen, and that skill set, but marry that with your ability to write songs and the rhyming, right? Because that's really important when you write a
Mhm,
children's book.
mhm,
And then your sensitivity, as you just described, to all these different groups that needed to understand this in their own way and how that book could be used, because you didn't have that, because you've been through all of this really before so much of the world now has had to understand autism, needs to understand autism, so many parents dealing with it. It's that alone, these books are such an example of what God can do in your life if you allow those things to become married together. And the penguin story, I mean, I can't get over it. And then let's not fail to mention that you ended up on the Today Show. These books were on the Today Show. These books have just begun to impact people, and simply because you paid attention to all of that and you were willing to say, I'm going to put this all together. And I am sure if I asked you at any point in your experience with Robbie, at any point back then, if I said to you, well, do you want to become an autism advocate? Do you want to work in all of that? Do you want to help people? I mean, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but you certainly didn't see that plan back then, did you, for your life? You didn't see that taking shape.
No, no,
And here you
it
are.
was when I kept seeing the numbers go from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 200, 1 in 100, 1 in 80, 1 in 50. I did say, God, what are you doing to me? Because
Yeah.
why I'm at the forefront of this. You know,
Yeah.
I'm ahead of all these other parents. And I had a feeling that he was preparing me for something, to help the parents that were coming after me, but I didn't know what. And the books, I have to tell you, like my whole life, I've always felt called to a higher purpose. I've always known I'm called to do something big,
Yep.
and I don't, that doesn't, I'm not being, boastful or anything. I just
No.
know that I'm called to do something big. And I just didn't know what. And all my life I was in church and in ministry, and I'm like, am I supposed to be in ministry? But then I'd get frustrated. I'm like, how much do we have to sit in church and keep hearing the same messages? I could preach that message. I've heard it 20 times. Like what,
Yeah.
there's got to be more outside of church. Um, but that's all that I saw in my box, right? It's the only
Yeah.
way you can do something is to teach children's church or teach or, be a teacher in church or something. I didn't know. And then I would go through seasons, like I thought, oh, maybe I'm supposed to be a worship leader someday, but that didn't happen. And then I went through a season where like I couldn't write songs. My sister used to write songs all the time and I couldn't do it. Like the only time if I wrote a song, it would be like straight verses right out of Psalms, like I
Mm.
couldn't think of anything original. And then all of a sudden when I hit 40, it was like I hit this new season where these songs just got dropped down into my soul, and they would get like downloaded like in rhyme, and I'd be driving in the car and I was hearing the words coming in rhyme, and I was like, man, how do I write this down? So I used to drive with a tape recorder so that I could
Mm.
sing into the tape recorder. And I wrote so many songs. But then I'm like, okay, I'm 40, and then I recorded a couple of them. But I'm like, I'm 42, 43 years old. Where am I going with music at this age? Like I don't
Wow.
get it. And I spent all these years painting murals for people. I'm like, well, that's nice and that's fun, but how am I helping people with that? Like I don't get it. Um, so so I've been frustrated basically, trying to figure out what is my purpose in life, right?
Right.
So when I sat down and wrote these books, all of a sudden when it took till I got to like the 8th or 10th one, it was like light bulb. I was like, oh wow, okay, now I get it. Because I thought of the subjects easily because of doing all the YouTube videos. I just thought, well, what do I do in this video? Oh yeah, I remember. We went to the beach. Oh yeah, and I was worried about him running away. There you go. There's a subject for that book. And I did it in rhyme so easily because of that season of the writing songs. And then I knew I could do all the illustrations because of the season that I went through of
Incredible.
painting all the murals. I'm like, this is easy for me. Everybody's like, all like, how did you do that? I'm like, you don't understand. I've been doing this stuff my whole life.
Yeah.
I just never put everything together in one project.
It is such an incredible story to me, and it's everything that I always want to grab people and tell them there is purpose in everything. And it's not clear during the time necessarily, either the challenge or when you're in a season of a particular talent that's emerging or influence that God's giving you or doors that are opening. Sometimes, these things happen and we're not sure, and then He brings it together like this, and He will do this for everyone. That's why He created us all so uniquely on purpose for a purpose. He knew what you were going to go through. He knew what you needed to not only go through it in the best version of yourself you could, but for it to come together and be used in a way that would totally change other people's experience in this world. I mean, it truly is an incredible thing, and it's not without struggle. It's not without pain. It's not without grief. I mean, this isn't a walk in the park, but when you're willing to do what you've done and pay the price in all ways, and even the work to do this. And now, of course, the doors are opening. And I want you to tell the necklace story before we close, but I want to say to the audience who doesn't realize this yet, is Cindy's work in this field now is emerging in ways that I don't think she can really predict what's next, but she continues, I'm watching her continue to say yes. And I think that's what you have to do, where it feels right to say yes to the next thing, to say yes to do this group, to say yes to do this retreat, to say, okay, I'm willing to be a vessel of that, to help people who are struggling with all of this. It's incredible to watch, Cindy, and I'm honored to be a friend of yours. I want you, before we close, and you're going to tell people how to get a hold of you, but
Mhm.
I want you to quickly tell the necklace story, because you just seem to have these kind of stories, like the things that happen to you. I'm always like, okay, what? Tell me that again. So I want you to
It's like what?
remind.
Yeah. Well, it's. I have to tell you, ever since Robbie went to heaven, all these things just keep happening. You
Yes.
know, and it's unbelievable. It's like he's. The Bible talks about the great cloud of witnesses. It's like people that have gone
Yes.
on before you that are watching you and praying for you. And he is my number one man. I swear it's because 27 years here, he could never talk, he could never communicate, and I laugh about it. I'm like, he probably never shuts up now. He's probably he's
That,
probably talking about me up there constantly, and he's making
uh,
all this stuff happen down here. He's talking to Jesus. He's like, okay,
yeah.
what can we do to make her laugh today? You know?
I love that, and I feel that, and I sense this young man who is free, right? He is free,
Mhm.
he's whole, he's healed, and he's doing that. And I want to remind the listeners that these when Robbie was cremated, that Cindy had some of his ashes made into this necklace. And I've heard of that before. I've heard of this, that you can do that. So you have this
Mhm.
beautiful blue, watery looking necklace. What happens?
Yeah. So it was about a year and 3 months after he passed. I'm at a conference at church all day. And during the lunch break, I ran down to the highway. I went to Target, Home Depot, all these things. I had to do a staging job the next day. I had to go get some stuff. I go back to the conference. I get home. It's after 11 o'clock at night. I'm getting undressed and I go to take my necklace off and it's gone. I was like, oh no,
Mm,
where is it? I called people still at church. I said, look around for it, see if you can find it. Look in the parking lot. They're looking in the rain. They couldn't find it. I'm like, oh no, where was I today? Oh, of all places, I was at the worst places that you could possibly be. Target, Home Depot. I was like, I'm never going to see that necklace ever again. I just imagined a kid finding it, and picking it up and put it in their pocket because it looks like this pretty piece of glass, like a marble. It looks like,
yeah.
So I post on Facebook, on several town pages that I'm on for business. And I had a picture of it. And I posted a picture of the necklace and I said, if anybody's at these places on the highway, could you look for the necklace? And if you find it, let me know. I said, to you, it's just a pretty piece of glass, but to me, it's priceless because it contains my son's ashes. I go to bed. I wake up the next morning. My phone is blowing up. It's getting shared hundreds of thousands of times. Like
Wow.
I couldn't even keep track of it. I never saw anything like it. And people in California, Arizona, Florida, like it's just all over the place. All these people are sharing it like crazy. So I went back to the places and looked myself, even at Target, Home Depot, couldn't find it. And then I had my real estate license at that time, so I did an open house. It ends at 4 o'clock. I check my messages, and this guy calls me, or he emailed me. Actually, he left a message, but I didn't hear it yet. But he emails me and said, "Cindy, I think I found your necklace.
Mm.
Call me." And I'm going, now look, I'm from New Jersey, right? I don't trust this guy. Who is this guy? But in real estate, they teach you to be very careful, never meet a man alone at a
Yes.
house for an open house, that this woman in Texas had gotten murdered, so
Right.
I'm thinking this guy just wants to get me alone so he can murder me, like I
Right.
don't know, who is this guy, right?
Right.
So I called him up and he was the cutest thing. He's like this nice Italian boy from Nutley. And he says, he was having lunch with somebody and they said, "Hey, Vinny, you're good at finding stuff. Maybe you can find this." And she
Mm.
shows him this post, of the picture. And he's like, "Okay, actually, I'm going to Home Depot. Let me see if I can find it." Right. So he pulls into the parking lot and there it is laying on the parking lot. And he says, he's telling me this whole story. And he said, "But I'm sorry to tell you it's broken in four pieces, but I
Mm.
do have it if you want it back." And I said, "Yes, please. I want it back." So
Amazing.
I arranged to meet him with my husband down on the highway. He gives it back to me. And I said, "Vinny, I said, there's a lot of people following this story. Can you take your picture with me so I could just tell people that we found it?" He's like, "Sure." So he takes a picture. I post it. And again, now, and it goes viral again. Hundreds of thousands of people are just sharing this all over the place. They were so happy, so excited that I found it. Well, a girl that lives in the nearby town, she's a newscaster for Channel 2 News. She sees it on Facebook. She calls me up. She says, "Will you do a story on the news? And do you think Vinny will do it?" I was like, I'm like, "I don't know. I'll ask him." So I called him. So we met her down at the Home Depot. And I show up and you see the Channel 2 news van, she's standing there with her microphone and I
Yeah.
hear her saying my name and Cindy, Jeller meeting. Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, "Ooh, you sound so newsy." Like, and
I
it was
love it.
cute. And then I find out Vinny is so shy that he
Oh,
hates having his picture taken, but he did the whole interview. It was so sweet. And then other people see it. Then the other reporters and newspapers and stuff all start calling me. Everybody wants to pick up this story. I'm like,
wow.
"Okay, but it's broken." So a friend of mine from church says she makes uh, necklaces. She makes these glass crosses into necklaces. She says, "Cindy, I have a little kiln. I can fix that for you. I can put it back in the kiln." I was like, "Wow, that would be amazing." So the reporter from the Star Ledger had called me and I told him that. And he said, "You know what? I'm going to bring a videographer and I want to film you doing that, fixing it."
Mm.
So they came, I sat in my office, I told them the whole story, talked to them about Robbie. Then they followed me to her house. They followed me putting it in the kiln. And I have to tell you though, I told you what the reaction that I had in the funeral home. Okay. Putting that necklace, Robbie's ashes, in the kiln was a little traumatic for me. It
Yeah.
was kind of freaking me out. It kind of felt like he was being cremated again, and I
Yeah.
had to, and I was trying to pretend like I'm so happy, but I really wasn't. I really was kind of very sad inside.
Mm.
But I was happy to have the necklace back, but I didn't like the whole kiln thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, they put together a beautiful life tribute of Robbie. They took pieces of from my YouTube channel and photos, and they did this absolutely beautiful story of Robbie, and they put it up on the NJ.com website in like beginning of this is I guess like the second week in March, right? And that was it. I thought that was the end. It was like a piece online on the NJ.com. So March 31st comes, it's my birthday. And my real estate team had gotten an invite to go into the city for Channel 7 news, completely unrelated, had nothing to do with my necklace. It was we were getting a tour of the news,
Mhm.
the Sunday morning news. So we're there. I got there 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm watching Amy Freeze do the weather and all this kind of stuff, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And like 7:30 in the morning, I'm getting texts and I'm going, "Who is texting me at 7:30 on a Sunday morning?" Right? And I check and it's my friend. She goes, "You're on the front page of the Sunday Star Ledger." I'm like, "What?" She sends me a screenshot of it. And it's this whole photo of us in front of the kiln holding the necklace up. And this guy did this beautiful story, took up the entire front page of the Sunday Star Ledger photo and it's on my birthday.
Oh my
And I was
gosh.
like, "Okay, this is Robbie again. This is Robbie saying happy birthday, mom." And
Oh,
I
I
was
can't.
like, of all days for this to come out. As like, and people, if they're not from New Jersey, they need to know that that's the biggest newspaper in the state. It covers the entire state of New Jersey. And to
Right.
make the front page on the Sunday, that's huge.
It, it just gets better and better. I mean, truly, I can't. I don't know what your next story is going to be. That's gonna, but I'll tell you what, to everyone listening, when you are supposed to be where you're supposed to be, when you're in line with God's will, these things happen. And I
Oh
mean,
man,
it's.
I gotta tell you. And listen, no, to answer your question from earlier, no, I did not see myself ever being an autism advocate because ever
Right.
since the books came out, I'm thrown back into the world of autism again. Everybody wants to do these interviews, and I started doing a podcast interviewing other parents. And I have to tell you, all the years that Robbie was going to school for autism, I didn't want to know anything about it. I lived it every day. Like we used to laugh when the April would come and it's Autism Awareness Month, and my
Yeah.
husband and I would say, "Yeah, we're very aware. We live it every day."
Right.
Like and you have very bad days where Robbie he was attacking my husband. They smear poop on the walls, calling the police to go
Mm,
find him. I mean, it's so stressful. It's just so not sleeping. Up
right.
all night, keeping everybody awake. Vomiting all over his room. Like it's not a picnic in any, and there were days that I hated the autism. I
Yeah.
hated it. So, and I didn't go to parenting classes or any of that kind of stuff. I was over it. I was sick of it.
Yeah.
So for me to be back in this, I had to get back in the swing of things to know what was going on before I started doing interviews. I'm like, I'm so out of the loop. Like
Mm,
I haven't paid attention in 10 years to what's going on
yeah.
with autism.
Yeah.
So that's why I started interviewing other moms and, people within the autism space and stuff just to get back. And now it's become like my world and I'm so passionate about it and I have to help these other families, these other moms. And I feel like, and when I want to quit, I feel like Robbie is saying to me, "No, mom, you can't quit. You got to help my peeps. You
Yep.
you got to help my peeps. You got to." And
Yep.
I won't give up for him because I feel
Yep.
like he's up there. There's just this driving force that I have to keep going. So, real quickly, I'll just say that I'm going to be doing a mom's retreat weekend, October 15th, 16th, 17th, and again, that's a whole other story. We don't have
Right.
time to do. But if you knew what God has done just within this past week,
Mm,
I can't even tell you. My dream was to have it at Crystal Springs Resort, but it's like $750 a person. By the time you pay $350 a
sure.
night, that's just for the hotel room. That's not for a massage that's $200 a person and the meals and all this stuff. I'm like, that's like $1,000 a person. I'm like, this is way too expensive. Someday maybe I'll start a foundation and raise a lot of money, but there's no way that this could ever happen now. But I
Right.
still wanted to do the retreat. I'm going to do it like a smaller version. I'll do it at my church. They could stay at a cheap hotel, whatever. Anyway, long story short, I can't even explain to you the people that I've met. One woman that has a foundation, another one that's been a professional event planner, very well connected. She just calls me up and she says, "I'm going to make this happen for you." She says, I have a connection with a hotel about an hour outside the city. It will be beautiful in the fall, blah, 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 blah. I said, "What is this place?" She said, "Crystal Springs Resort." I said, OMG.
It's
She
crazy.
calls them up. She calls them up. She negotiates a price. She signs a contract. She's going up there to give him a $10,000 deposit.
Hmm.
Okay, all on my behalf to do this for these moms. And she negotiated it down to $125 a night. If they split a room with somebody, it's only going to cost them $125. It's $1,000 it would cost them, $125. They're going to get massages. I have a comedian coming. I have speakers coming. It's going to be phenomenal. And again, there's no way that this would happen unless heaven is converging on my behalf because it's beyond me. I there's no way I could have done this myself.
But that's what happens. But that's what following your purpose, that's what it looks like. It's not that it's easy.
Hmm.
It's that things happen in a way that you couldn't make happen. And you still have to do the work and you still have to be willing to chase it and be willing to listen to
Hmm.
that still small voice. So it's not that it's easy, it's that it's meaningful, purposeful, and there's something about it that you just know you're getting favor. So absolutely. So this is incredible. And I know that a year from now, we're going to have even more to talk about because I believe what you're doing has just begun. So tell people how they can follow you, get in touch with you, listen to your podcast you recently launched, even go back and see all of Robbie's movies, get the books, whatever.
Hmm.
Give them the details.
Yeah, well, everything is on. I have a new website for the books. It's called robbiesworldbook.com. And on that website, they can go to the link to my YouTube page. They can go to the link for the podcast. So everything is linked there, and they can follow me on Instagram. But they're not going to remember my name. It's Cindy Gellermini. If they go on my Cindy Gellermini page, I post the podcasts on there, and there's the link to the book website on there too, the Robbie's World book. But if they just go to that website, I think that's the easiest way, robbiesworldbook.com. But if they want to message me, they can do that through Instagram. And I have a Facebook page that's Robbie's World dash Robbie and Me Autism Reality. It's kind of long, so that's why the easiest is the website, I think.
They'll find you. You have a unique
Mhm.
last name. They'll find you. And I think anybody who right now is just moved by this, which I think everybody will be, and especially those that are struggling with a child who is facing this, you definitely need to find Cindy, and she is a source of hope.
Something else I've been thinking about lately too is like when I presented this whole idea for the retreats to people, they were like, "This is so big, this is so much work. Oh my gosh, how can you do all?" And I'm like, "This is easy for me. You don't understand. It's like, I thrive on stress."
Yeah.
And I realize it's because of everything that I've been through. I'm so used to such a high stress level living with Robbie in the house that
Yeah.
now I'm bored. I get so bored so easily. So I have to have big projects like
Yeah.
almost impossible projects and things to overcome and
Mm.
and things to do in my life. And I just think that's just how I'm wired. And I think just like Joseph in the Bible, where his brothers picked on him and threw him into slavery, and then he was in
Yeah.
jail, and he went through all that stuff, but it prepared him to be the second in command of all of Egypt someday,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
that's kind of how I feel. So that's that. People want to know, how do you do it? Where did you get the energy from? Whatever. I'm like, well, you don't understand what my life has been like up until now.
Yeah.
So
And God's using it all. I mean,
yeah,
that is really the element of the story. Cindy, thank you so much for sharing all that. It was moving, inspirational, all the things that it's supposed to be. All of us have something in our life. The story is different, but God doesn't let anything go to waste. And what he created out of this and what he's doing with you in the future, I mean, it's incredible. So I honor you for listening to his promptings and for not running away from that and being willing to be used. So it's exciting to see that. I appreciate you sharing all of those very intimate and special details with us, with the audience. And I frankly look forward to a year from now bringing you back and saying, "What's happened? Tell me more stories."
I'm sure there will be many more.
Absolutely. Cindy, thank you so much for coming on. And to my audience, guys, this was definitely worth every moment. Have a blessed day, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to Master Your Mindset Radio. Before you go, please visit elizabethnader.com to learn more about the Mindset Maven and how she is guiding high performers to map their mindset to their message so they can effectively express who they are and why their ideas should win. Looking forward to seeing you online.